Hey guys, what is up? My name is Lannon and welcome to the Jersey Zone. So today I wanted to do a video talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs and kind of doing like a big overview on their entire season. Now if you guys are new here, make sure to hit the subscribe button, but I usually do just do like jersey content and stuff like that, and I do tend to look at like some other teams as well every now and again. But my favorite team is the Toronto Maple Leafs, so I feel like I want to do like deep dives on the Toronto Maple Leafs and do like a preview of every season and a review of every season, kind of just to get my thoughts on it and everything like that. Mostly just for myself. I really do like doing these kinds of videos. I did also do a video talking about their Game 7 loss immediately after they lost Game 7. It was like 3 weeks ago now or something like that. However long ago it was. I literally recorded that video like right after the game ended. I'm not even sure if the game actually ended. I think I might have even just like left with like 20 seconds left in the game and just decided to record and say, screw it, whatever, they're not coming back. I knew that. That video did extremely well, a lot better than I thought it was going to. It became my most viewed video in like under 12 hours or something like that. It was crazy. Now, like 90% of those views are like views from other fan bases who were just trying to find videos of Leafs fans being extremely upset and just going to the comments and dunking on them, which is completely fair, but either way, I'm not really expecting to get those kind of views here, obviously. Like I said, this video is more just for myself personally. I do like to do these kind of videos, and I like to look back on my like kind of thought process before the season starts or after the season, and you know, that kind of stuff. So anyways, let's get into it here. So I'm going to break it up into a couple of parts here. I'm actually going to talk a little bit about how I felt coming into the season. I usually won't do that for these like after season previews and everything like that in the future, but since I didn't do anything before this season, I thought I would talk a little bit about that. Then I'm going to talk about my thoughts on the regular season, then the playoffs, and then I'll kind of do like a little bit of an overview slash what I think is going to come next season. So coming into the season, I was like mildly confident about the Maple Leafs. Obviously, the season before, they lost in the playing round against the Columbus Blue Jackets, and that was a little bit upsetting because that was probably the best chance they had at winning a round up until that point. I mean, against Washington, they had no chance, and then the back-to-back times against Boston, even though they probably should have won the second time around, I still think Boston overall is probably the better team, and also Boston had home ice advantage, so they had a little bit going in their favor there. But with the Columbus series, I was like, okay, they're fairly close in terms of like where they placed. I believe Toronto was 8th and Columbus was 7th or something like that. I thought they had a really good chance at beating Columbus. Obviously, it went to 5 games. They ended up losing it. But like the main kind of talking point coming out of that round was the fact that they only shot, I think it was like 3% or something around there. So coming out of that, you're like, there's no way that's going to happen again. Korpisalo and Merzlikins were just fantastic and out of this world. They were really good in that play-in series. So, you know, it was a little bit unfortunate that they lost, and they also probably played their worst game in Game 5 in that series, but coming out of it, you still felt like a little bit confident in the Maple Leafs. And looking at the North Division, I thought personally they were going to finish fairly close to the top in the North Division. I had them coming in at second place, but I did think they had a good chance at coming in first in the North Division. And in terms of like playoff success, I was expecting them to win at least one round, and that was kind of like my expectation coming into the season was they were going to win one. And that's it. And if they win one, I'm happy. I do not care. Whatever. Obviously, we know what happens, but yeah, I was like, one round, they'll most likely win that one round, depending on who they play. So I was still kind of iffy on that, but that's how I felt coming into the season. But let's look at the regular season here. Let's go over some stats. So the record for this year was 35, 14, and 7. They ended up getting 77 points and finished first in the North Division. Obviously, they had a fantastic season. Their top scorer was Mitch Marner with 55 games played, 20 goals, 47 assists for 67 points. Another good season from him. Matthews was their top goal scorer with 52 games played, 41 goals, 25 assists, 66 points. Their top goaltender was Jack Campbell, who played 22 games, had 17 wins, 3 losses, and 2 overtime losses with a .921 save percentage and a 2.15 goals against average. And their power play ended up at a 20% with their penalty kill being a 78%. So overall, looking at the big picture, the Toronto Maple Leafs had a fantastic regular season. Their goal scoring was fantastic. They barely really had a night where they couldn't really score. Their defense was revitalized. It was insane how good their defense was this year. And it was even good when Morgan Rielly had a really, really bad regular season. Morgan Rielly was not good this year at all. He was really poor in the defensive zone, which he's never really been that great in the defensive zone, but this year I thought he was extraordinarily bad, and I didn't really think he had that great of an offensive year either. But TJ Brody coming in was just Oh my God, he was so good. It's a great pickup for the Toronto Maple Leafs because he just stopped basically every single 2-on-1 that ended up happening. He was there blocking the pass and doing everything he could to try and make Jack Campbell's job, or whoever was net, make their job easier. He did a fantastic job at kind of making sure that if Riley pinched and ended up getting caught, he would be back there and he would be stopping that 2-on-1. He did a really good job at that. And even guys like Bogosian were super helpful. He was really good this season for us as well. A lot better than I expected him to be. Overall, that defense was just fantastic. Our goaltending this season was really good as well. Basically just coming from Jack Campbell. Everyone else was just kind of okay. Michael Hutchinson was a lot better than he was last year, although he really didn't play that much. David Riddick, I think, only played like 3 or 4 games. He really wasn't that good, but he was kind of just there for insurance. I wasn't really too worried about him. And then Freddie Anderson, I feel really bad for Freddie. I really, really like Freddie a lot. He was definitely one of my favorite Maple Leafs, probably coming into last season, I would say. But just, he's had a really poor past 2 seasons. But his first 2 seasons, he basically carried the Toronto Maple Leafs and was the reason they won a ton of games. But just recently, he's played really bad. And this season, he was not good at all. And I don't really blame him. He had a lot of injuries this season. And there was a lot of times where I think he was just playing because Jack Campbell was also hurt. And he didn't really want to have that backup of Michael Hutchinson. And I forget who even our 4th goalie would have been then. But either way, it was just really unfortunate for him. He just had a really poor season, and it really sucks that his Leaf tenure is going to come to an end on a season like this where, he played really poorly, he had a lot of injuries, and then he didn't even get a chance in the playoffs either. I just feel really bad for him personally. I hope he does well wherever he goes next, but yeah, it's quite sad, honestly. But overall, the Toronto Maple Leafs regular season was absolutely fantastic. I can really only think of 3 really bad losses for the Toronto Maple Leafs. There was that first game against the Ottawa Senators where they were up 5-1 in the second period with a minute left, and then they gave up a goal in that last minute of the second period. Ended up losing that game 6-5 in overtime. That's an embarrassing loss, but I was like, whatever. The Toronto Maple Leafs always seem to have one really embarrassing loss per season. It always tends to happen, so I was like, you know what? There you go. That's the one loss. I don't care. And then we had those back-to-back losses against the Vancouver Canucks, who had just came off of their COVID protocol break, where they were off for an entire month, and they lost both games to them. Those are also games that you probably shouldn't lose, but I'm still, it's 3 games out of a 56-game season. It's really not that bad. I really wasn't that nervous about it. I really wasn't that worried about it. The main thing that I was worried about personally was that power play, because once again, it started off really strong, and then the last 30 games, it was cold. It was so bad that last 30 games, I can't even remember exactly how many goals they scored, but it was 5 or 6 out of 50 power play opportunities, something like that. It was awful. And that's something the Leafs really need to work on, because that happened, I think, last season where it started off really hot and then got super cold. And I think that might have even happened in the season before that as well. Can't quite remember on that one, but it's basically been 2 seasons back to back where they've had a very hot power play at the start and then it's just tailed off and it's been awful. That is really something they need to focus on. I don't know what they do. I don't know if they need to switch it up a little bit more. I really don't know what it is. I don't know if it's confidence or what, or teams are figuring out what the Leafs do. And since they don't really change a whole lot, it just gets stale and really easy to counter. Whatever it is, they need to figure it out because it's really bad. But other than that, I really didn't have too many worries. I had maybe a few worries about a couple of depth guys like Thornton and Simmons. They weren't really playing that well in the last half of the season there. After they came off their injuries, both of them had injuries. So once they came back from those, they really weren't playing that well. But I thought their last 5 games or so, they really started to pick it up. So I wasn't really that worried about them. So overall, heading into the playoffs, I was confident because look at the season the Toronto Maple Leafs had. Look at the statistics of pretty much everything. How can you not be confident about that team? And I've seen some comments just randomly on Twitter and a couple in my Leafs Game 7 video talking about, oh, look at the Leafs fan being all confident and cocky. Ha ha ha, this is what they get for being confident. But look at their season. How can you not be? Personally for me, I am never confident in the Leafs. I always felt like they're going to find some way to screw it up. Every single playoff series, I'm not confident in them at all. When they were up 3-2 against Boston in 2019, I wasn't overly confident. When they were playing against Columbus there, wasn't overly confident in them. I'm usually not really that confident in the Toronto Maple Leafs because they haven't shown me anything to make me confident in them. So I never am. But this season, they showed me, look at us. We can do something. Trust us. And I was like, okay, I'll trust you. And now... yeah. So let's talk about the playoffs here. So obviously, the Toronto Maple Leafs lost once again in round 1, once again in a Game 7 against the Montreal Canadiens after blowing a 3-1 series lead. Awful. Really, really bad. Let's go over the statistics. So our top point scorer was William Nylander with 7 games played, 5 goals, 3 assists, 8 points. He was also our top goal scorer as well. Our goaltender of record was Campbell, who had played all 7 games. Obviously 3 wins, 4 losses. He had a .934 save percentage and a 1.81 goals against average. Our power play was at 13%, our penalty kill 84%. Let's talk about this. So, where do I want to start? I think I'm going to start just by talking about the games themselves. I'm just going to quickly do like a quick recap for each game. I watched the games right before I did this video. They kind of sucked. Wasn't really loving watching those games back, but let's talk about them a little bit. So in game 1, obviously they lost 2-1, and that was the game with the scary John Tavares injury. I really don't blame them for losing that game. That was an awful game to watch. I wasn't really even loving watching that game after what happened to John Tavares. It was scary, not a lot of fun, but I still didn't think they played overly bad. I thought they played all right considering the circumstances and everything like that. The thing that cost them, their power play, something that they needed to work on. They couldn't really get it to go. They had a power play in the third period of a tied playoff game, and they gave up a shorthanded goal. You can't do that. You really can't. Now, that being said, Paul Byron, beauty goal. That was like such a nice goal. I'm not going to blame Campbell or anything like that because that was ridiculous. It was a really nice goal. But that being said, you just really can't give up that shorthanded breakaway. You just can't. So unfortunately, in that game 1, it was that power play that cost them. Now in game 2, they ended up winning 5-1. And I thought they looked really good. I think their top line actually looked pretty good that game. I think Matthews got a goal. I think Marner got 2 assists in that game as well. They looked pretty good in that game. I thought they didn't look too bad, and that is something that is critiqued with the Toronto Maple Leafs in their playoff performance this year, was that top line and was Matthews and Marner and how they played. I really think they played pretty well in that game too. They got a couple points coming out of that game. They got a power play goal as well, which is really nice. That's good to see. The only goal that was scored against was like just a scrambly type kind of goal, and it just ended up going in. So I thought they played pretty well in game 2 there. Now in game 3, this was a little bit more of a close one. They won 2-1. This game featured that amazing Carey Price save on Spezza where he dove across and saved it. That was crazy. And this one did also have that Nick Suzuki goal where you probably want Campbell to have that one. But the thing that I was kind of looking at with that goal in particular was I thought Riley really wasn't aggressive enough on that play. But Riley did end up making up for it in that game. They had a really nice kind of tic-tac-toe play. Riley ended up getting the goal, and I also thought that was a goal that Carey Price probably should have had. He ended up like sliding over instead of just staying still. If he stood still, probably would have saved it, but I think he was looking at like a pass to the front of the net, and it just ended up going in. But that game was a really close game. Like the last kind of couple minutes there was really intense. And in game 4, the Leafs won 4-0. That was Galchenyuk's really, really good game. He had 2 fantastic passes. He got the empty net goal as well. He looked really good in this game. And Thornton and Spezza also got goals in this game. I believe Thornton's goal was a power play goal. So you get a power play goal. You get some goals from like your bottom production there. So that was really nice. Spezza played really well in this series, by the way. He was fantastic. But then you move on to game 5, and this is where I kind of struggled a little bit watching back those replays or watching back those highlights because, man, it just sucked. But this game, they lost 4-3 in overtime. This is the game, and I saw this kind of in my comments of the Game 7 video, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, but people were blaming the Leafs defense and goaltending. This is the game that I think you can actually blame the Leafs defense, because this was the game where Sandin had 2 really, really bad giveaways, and they both ended up costing them and went into the back of their net. This is the game that I kind of feel you can probably blame on the defense here. But yeah, so you had those 2 really bad giveaways from Sandin, ended up in the back of the net. The Leafs were down 3-0, but they ended up coming back, and they ended up tying it 3-3. Muzzin got 2 goals. Galchenyuk assisted on that second Muzzin goal as well. And then it went to overtime, and then you have the Galchenyuk giveaway. Not a good giveaway. Really, really bad. Ended up having a 2-0, and obviously they scored. It was Caulfield and Suzuki. You don't really want that in overtime, a 2-0. Probably not the best thing to have. And then in game 6, this was another really tough game. They ended up losing 3-2 in overtime. And this, this game was really, this was probably one of the worst games for me, in my opinion. This was the one that was most annoying to me because their penalty kill was so good pretty much all series long. I don't think they allowed a power play goal up until game 6. And then game 6, they take a penalty, they get scored on. And then Sheldon Keefe challenged that goal, and I kind of get it, I kind of don't at the same time. If Campbell made more of an effort to get back into the net, I think that's a fine challenge then. He really didn't, though. It ended up counting, so that made them go back on the penalty kill, and then that was the moment where Mitch Marner was in like the middle of the ice, all alone. He had like a second or two to get rid of it, and he flips it up over the glass, makes it a 5-on-3. really, really bad penalty to take. And I'll also talk about Marner a little bit later on. But then, of course, they score on that 5-on-3 again. So you have 2 power play goals against in Game 6, where in the first 5 games, you didn't let a single power play goal in. So it's just really frustrating that their penalty kill played so well, and then they let 2 in the same game. It's really not that great. But they do once again come back to tie the game at 2-2, goes to overtime. Once again, it's a giveaway that leads to the overtime game-winning goal. Really unfortunate. And then, of course, in Game 7, they lose 3-1. Price was really good this game. He was absolutely fantastic. There was a little bit of a bad goal by Jack Campbell, but honestly, I don't overly blame him. That was probably the one goal that personally I think he should have had in like the entire series. There was another one, like maybe he should have had that one, but this one was like the only goal that I specifically think of. He 100% needed to have that one. He didn't. Sucks that it was in Game 7, but honestly, the entire Leafs really didn't play that well. Like, that entire game was probably their worst game in the series, which is, once again, something that they keep kind of happening to them. Their final elimination games just really seem to be their worst games of the series, and that keeps happening. They really need to figure that out. But even when the Leafs did have chances, Price was there and was stopping pretty much everything. Hyman was probably their best player. He had the most chances in that game, and that can't happen. Like, I love Zach Hyman. I like him a lot. It looks like they're probably not going to re-sign him, which is, once again, something I'll talk about later on, but that can't happen. Zach Hyman can't be your best player. And then, of course, Nylander scores with like a minute left or something like that. Doesn't matter. Anyways, that was the quick recap of the series. But looking at the series overall, one thing that I saw a lot of, or a couple of times I should say, in my comments of the Game 7 video, is people were blaming the Leafs defense and goaltending for that loss. If you blame the Leafs goaltending and defense for that loss, either you just are a troll or you didn't watch the games. Those are the only 2 things that I can think of, because that's just not true. It really was not true. The Leafs defense was great in the series. Campbell was fantastic. I mean, Campbell was better statistically than Carey Price was. I don't think he was actually better. I think Price made the more acrobatic and more like big saves than Jack Campbell did. But I really only think Jack Campbell let in 1 goal that he probably should have had. Other than that, he was really good. He was fantastic, actually. It really wasn't the fault of Jack Campbell, and I really don't think it was the defense's fault either. The only game that I think it was probably the defense's fault was Game 5, where Sandin had both of those 2 giveaways, and then there was that Galchenyuk giveaway in the overtime as well. That was the only time that I really think it was the Leafs defense that cost them, was that Game 5. Now, that being said, I do think Montreal is really good at capitalizing on mistakes and turnovers and stuff like that. That is one thing that I noticed in this series, was that, like, I personally don't think the Leafs gave up that many opportunities or that many chances, but when they did, the Canadians capitalized on it and they scored, and they did a really good job at that. And they did a really good job rushing up the ice and getting like those 2-on-1s and those odd man breaks, and that was something they were really good at in this series, and the Leafs really didn't do a good enough job at countering that. Just the thing personally, the thing that I kind of look at for this series was the forwards, which is not good, because for me, you know, looking at the Leafs, you look at their forward lineup, you go, all right, that is something I don't worry about. I don't worry about the Leafs forward depth or the Leafs forwards not being able to score. I look at their defense and their goaltending. But those 2 ends held up. It was the forwards that did not. And that is something that's happened a couple of times, honestly. I feel like in a couple of series recently, like looking back at the play-in series, I also don't really think it was the defense and the goaltending, although it definitely wasn't as good as it was in this series here this year, but it was really their scoring last year in that play-in series against Columbus, where they really couldn't score. And once again, I think that was an issue this year. Not really with the first 4 games, it was the last 3, where they just couldn't close it out. I don't know what it is. I really don't know if it's a mental thing or what it is, but they just couldn't get it done. And like, let's look at Matthews and Marner here, right? Because those are like kind of the big names that everyone's talking about this year, and that they really screwed up. They really didn't show up to play. Obviously, Nylander showed up to play. He was really good. And then with Tavares, obviously, he was injured. So out of the big top 4, it was Matthews and Marner that people are criticizing. So Matthews had 1 goal, 4 assists for 5 points in those 7 games. Marner had the 4 assists in those 7 games. So that's really not good enough for your top line. I really do think that the Danault line played really well against Matthews. He had a really tough time finding any open space at all, and even when he did have an open space there, they really closed on him quickly, I found, and he really didn't get that much room. Now, that being said, Marner's got to be able to do something with that. I really don't think he played. I thought for the first like 3 or 4 games, I actually didn't think he played all that bad. It was those last few games where he really struggled, in my opinion. I thought he really wasn't creating enough scoring chances. He's not enough of a scoring threat. I mean, he hasn't scored in 18 playoff games. He needs to figure that out. He needs to score. And I know he's not a scoring type of guy, but he still can score. I mean, he put up 20 goals this year, so it's not like he can't score. He's just really having struggles in the playoffs this year. And I also have seen some people say, like, oh, he doesn't try in the playoffs or anything like that. I don't think that's true. I do think Marner tries in the playoffs. Personally, how I look at it is I see someone who cares too much and cares so much that he just gets in his own head, gets super nervous, and just can't really play his game and can't do his own thing. I mean, that penalty in Game 6 where he shoots it over the glass with like 2 to 3 seconds to actually move the puck. That's not a penalty that you should usually take. And that's not a penalty that I think Marner usually takes either. But in the playoffs, he does because he's just so nervous. And that's at least how I look at it. I don't think he doesn't care enough. I just think he cares too much. But yeah, so overall, the playoffs were just really unfortunate, basically. So to quickly kind of look at next season, I'm not going to go too much into next season here because, like I said, I'll do a deep dive of it when the season almost starts, probably in like September or something like that. You obviously have the expansion draft coming up with Seattle. They're probably going to take Dermott or Kerfoot. I really hope they take Dermott over Kerfoot. But at the same time, like I like Kerfoot, and I think he played well in the playoffs as well. But at the same time, it would be nice to get that cap hit taken off the books. But then you got to find another third line center, so that's a little bit difficult there. With Dermott, you at least expect to have Sandin in the lineup, and then hopefully have Timothy Liljegren come up and step up and be that number 6 defenseman there. That's at least my hope there. And then with free agency, you're going to be looking for another backup goaltender to play with Jack Campbell. Jack Campbell will be the starter next season, so it's going to be interesting to see kind of how that goes. Now, the big thing that I'm looking at next season and worries me a lot is, are the Leafs even going to make the playoffs? Because next season, they're going back into the Atlantic Division, and that is a stacked division, man. That is extremely stacked. You have Tampa, you have Boston, you have Florida. All of those teams were really good this season. We'll see kind of how Boston does, if they're going to fall back. I think they actually might, but we'll see. And then obviously you have the Canadiens, who didn't have a great regular season, but they're doing well in the playoffs, so who knows? You have Ottawa, who had a fantastic end of the regular season. I do think they're going to be an upcoming team this season. We'll see how well they actually do, but they still had a really good end of the season. And then you have Buffalo, who I'm honestly not too terrified with, and then Detroit, once again, not too terrified about them. But the top 6 in that division, like that's a hard division. It's not easy. Every single team, I think, has a chance of making it into the playoffs, maybe aside from Ottawa, but like I still think they're an up-and-coming team. So I really am not too sure if the Leafs are going to make the playoffs. I'm quite afraid about it, honestly. Honestly, this is going to be a tough season. Like, it really is, because with their regular season playing so well, if they play well and they make the playoffs, I still don't think I'll be overly happy. It is that playoff kind of success. If they do well in the playoffs, then I'll be happy about it and it'll be cool. But they can't really improve my confidence in them until they make it to the playoffs and until they do something in there. So I'm just going to be watching for 82 games, being like, either cool, they're winning, I still don't overly care, or man, they're not going to make the playoffs this year. This is great. So it's going to be an interesting season next season. Like I said, I'll go a little bit more into a deep dive of next season before the season actually starts. We'll see if Zach Hyman actually ends up re-signing, or if he doesn't. That's going to be an interesting loss if he ends up moving on. And we'll also see who they lose to the Seattle expansion. Anyways, that's going to be it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys did watch this far, really appreciate it, because it's probably going to be a really long video. Like I said, though, this video is kind of just for me. I don't really care how many views it gets or anything like that, because this is just for me to look back on and be like, man, I was really dumb. I have no idea what I'm talking about, or just, you know, kind of stuff like that. But if you guys did like this video, make sure to leave a like and make sure to subscribe to the channel. Also, make sure to follow me on my Instagram and my Twitter at TheJerseyZoneYT on Instagram and at TheJerseyZone on Twitter. Links are in the description down below. Like I said, that's it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.